Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Diamond Global's webinar on how to minimize TFW turnover in Canadian businesses. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Benjamin Guth, the VP at the Diamond Global Recruitment Group. I've had the very good fortune of meeting most of you who are on today. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm consistently traveling, would love to sit down and have a coffee. At Diamond Global, we specialize in helping Canadian businesses through the complex foreign recruitment process. Joining me today on this webinar, we're very fortunate to have Sean Steward, our Director of Operations at Diamond Global.
Hi everyone, thrilled to be here today, sharing a little know-how into retention, and excited about the opportunity to speak with you all.
Okay, so before we start with content today, there's a few logistics items I would love to review with you today. So we're going to be using the GoToWebinar platform for this webinar. All participants have been signed on in listen-only mode, but throughout the webinar, you are welcome to submit questions through the chat console on your right-hand side. If you've logged into your computer to see the presentation on the slide deck, you will notice that the GoToWebinar console on the top right of your webinar screen is just kind of sitting there. Through the chat feature, excuse me, through the chat feature, please feel welcome to type and submit your questions as we move along. I will take questions at the end of the webinar, and your questions and identity will only be seen by me, so it will remain completely confidential. I'll read out your question, but keep all identities secret, and would be happy to walk you through whatever answers or insight I may have. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be provided to all attendees for review, sharing, and later viewing. So let's talk a little bit about today and what we're going to go through. So the agenda for today's webinar is to provide you with real suggestions on how to minimize TFW turnover in your business. The 6 essential steps to minimizing TFW turnover that we're going to step through today include the following. The first one, why you should get to know your temporary foreign workers before they arrive. This is vital, and we're going to talk in detail about it. Number 2, how to manage the expectations of temporary foreign workers. The next one is how to manage your team's expectations and what that experience is going to be like when bringing in a new group of talent from overseas. The next group is how to help your temporary foreign workers avoid Canadian culture shock. We're going to discuss proper planning for post-arrival settlement. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about exit orientations or welcome to Canada seminars, or whatever you may want to call them, but we'll talk in detail about those later. We're also going to address the recent immigration changes from the federal government on the Canadian Experience Class program and how they might affect the retention of your temporary foreign workers over the long term. Now, on that note, with those recent changes, we'll touch base on the Canadian government changes, but the other day there was a pretty significant announcement in this industry, and I want to make sure everybody is aware. The Australian government just made it a lot easier to immigrate to Australia under their skilled worker program. So their equivalent of an LMO has now been washed for skilled individuals. So if you have skilled workers in process and you're waiting on an LMO or you're waiting on a work permit, this directly affects you. They will be approached by Australian employers. Australia is our #1 competitor for talent internationally, and it's the type of thing that you have to pay attention to, otherwise you might lose somebody before they even arrive in Canada. Okay, let's talk a little bit about retention. Now, the process of recruiting temporary foreign workers is exceptionally taxing. You all know it's time-consuming, it's expensive, it's frustrating, it's extremely labor-intensive. Those of you who have been through the program know exactly what I'm talking about. You also know how good it feels to work so hard for so long and finally get to that day where you get to stand in the arrivals hall of the airport with that big sign that says welcome and the big van outside to help get your candidates home. At this point, you feel victorious. At At this point, you can finally rest knowing that your business is in strong, capable hands and that you have respite from the grueling labor shortage, right? Not always the case. Sometimes your new, expensive, long-awaited workforce, if they're not properly prepared, can leave as early as day one. All of that time, all of that effort, and all of that money can be wasted if you're not proactive with this program. Today we're going to talk about the challenges of TFW turnover and how you can avoid them. I know many of you are interested in the recent changes to the Canadian Experienced Class Immigration Program that was just implemented recently. Those of you who currently employ temporary foreign workers in the following categories, especially in food service and hospitality, will be significantly affected. The following categories are cooks, or NOC 6322, food service supervisors 6311, administrative officers 1221, accounting technicians and bookkeepers 1311, and retail sales supervisors 6211. And for those of you who don't know, the CEC program basically stated that if you're working in a skilled role in any NOC O, A, or B category for 1 full year, you can qualify for permanent residency. It's a fantastic program, and it was the primary strategy for most hospitality, food service, and retail businesses for getting their workers permanent residency status. Unfortunately, for those positions, those have now been dropped. The good news is that for most of these roles, other federal or provincial programs may be available for an immigration stream. However, the bad news is that it may be too late for your existing temporary foreign workers. Now, the upside is that the changes shouldn't cause you too much of a headache for the future of your program, but your existing candidates may not qualify for the strict requirements that are the Federal Skilled Worker Program or certain provincial nominee programs or other programs that may exist. If you are curious and you have existing temporary foreign workers in those positions that do want to immigrate, please do not hesitate to give me a call. I can give them a free one-on-one with one of our immigration consultants, and we'll evaluate whether or not they will qualify for a program in that area. Okay, so let's talk about keeping your star performances. Now, many employers have this or a similar experience. They've hired a stellar candidate who became their star employee, and then unfortunately a few years later they're faced with the terrible reality that that individual will never be able to immigrate. So at Diamond, and this is something that you should all pay attention to when you're recruiting individuals overseas, we pre-screen candidates for eventual immigration success. Okay? You have to check to see what the current program requirements are and make sure that those candidates that you're interviewing and recruiting today will qualify for at least 2 programs. If you employ candidates in the NOC codes I mentioned before, listen carefully. From the time that you recruit, ensure that they've got the education that meets the specific restrictions that are on the new programs, that they've got the background, that they have the experience, that they have the English skills. Thorough background checks are required, okay? They must be a part of the initial screening. Your potential hire must have educational credentials in a related field to the position. Previously, you were able to hire nurses to come and work as food counter attendants and eventually food service supervisors, but under certain provincial programs, they need to have a hospitality or food service degree. This won't service your long-term degree needs unless you pay close attention and you add in that additional step during the recruitment program. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a 36-month plan. Now, this was my big learning curve when I started working. One of my first clients that I ever began working with was a large hotel group in rural Alberta. This group had brought in about 40 temporary foreign workers through another agency. And we all know that was their first mistake, but we'll touch more on that later. I remember being really excited about meeting all of the new staff from overseas. Now, they had all come from the Philippines, and I had been studying Tagalog, so I was very excited to practice my Filipino and see what kind of help we could offer them. And we spoke for hours about different immigration officers. Options. One-on-one, we spoke in groups. I mean, this is why they came to Canada in the first place, and they were all eager. After a long period of consultation with the workers, I returned back to my office and began preparing immigration options for each person. Every single one of these workers had unique experience. They all had their own background, different education. They all were in different roles. It was a big mixed bag of candidates. I analyzed each file, and I had selected a path for successful immigration for each and every one. I had instructed one of these specific workers that he would be going through the Federal Skilled Worker Program. And I thought he understood. However, unfortunately, his friend told him that he could qualify for a provincial nominee program. It would be faster, and he'd get his family here quicker. With his limited knowledge of how the immigration system works in Canada and the misinformation from his friend, this worker marched into one of the provincial immigration offices in Alberta and said, "Do I qualify? Here are my credentials." That officer clearly said no, as this person was destined for a federal program and he didn't have the requirements for the AINP program. He immediately returned to the hotel and informed all of the workers in his group that they would not qualify for immigration because the government said so. The power of peer pressure prevailed. Every single one of those workers believed their friend. They did not sign up for immigration assistance, and they all returned home at the end of their contract. That was a shame. It was a lesson that I learned and will not learn again.
Yeah, this was an interesting scenario because you know, when we look back on this, what became pretty evident is that the employer really wasn't taking the vested interest that's necessary in their staff. And you know, without that support there, and without that encouragement, and without all those touchy-feely things an employer can do, you know, as Ben said, these candidates were really left to their own and really, you know, really sort of striking out and trying to figure out how to do it all on their own. So his attitude, you know, was really the big issue there. You always have to remember, new arrivals are gullible and they don't necessarily know who to trust. You know, they can often fall victim to fraudulent ghost account consultants and even their friends' information, or as I should say, misinformation, that can ultimately have a negative impact on their life. So really the first thing we need to highlight here is in the building of trust, and that really begins from the get-go. You know, once that trust is established, you can encourage your staff to, you know, to use a licensed, reputable consultant, and therefore, you know, not having that lost time and money. You know, what happened in this situation was a shame because obviously the employer had to really go back to the well and start from scratch and go through the new LMO and new onboarding, and really there was a lesson learned here. You know, the employer must let the employees know that they have a vested interest in their staff's future. We also learned that peers, they will talk, and they will talk, and they will talk. And whether that information is accurate or not, you know, you as an employer really don't have any way to know. So building that trust from the get-go is really what we need to start.
Sean, you're absolutely right. Trust is essential, but almost more importantly than trust is making sure that these candidates know absolutely everything they need to know about the program and about their future as possible. If you had temporary foreign workers, you know they will talk when they arrive, and they will get all kinds of information from every single source. If they don't know for a fact what the next 3 years of their lives are going to look like, and the requirements for different immigration programs and different timelines that they're going to need to achieve different documentation submissions, then they're going to try to get that information elsewhere. We're going to talk more on that later. But let's talk about our 36-month plan. Now, the first stage of the Diamond process is identifying what the next 3 years is going to look like for your team. But I highly encourage that every single one of you, after this webinar, sits down with your HR team and forecasts out 36 months. Once you have a very strong idea of what the next 3 years are going to look like, share your plan with your workers. Do not deviate from this plan. Now, we'll help our clients forecast for business changes, for additional staffing needs, for employee growth potential, and we'll talk about that later. But most employers do not keep great records on expiry dates of work permits, for example. Without that information, your workers are going to come to you every couple of months and say, well, I'm starting to get nervous. My status is about to expire. What's next? Am I going to get promoted? All of this information needs to be outlined in advance. As an employer, you need to know when to start planning for your next LMO. You need to know approximately what the current wait times are for LMOs with Service Canada and for name ads, which are growing exponentially. It's terribly frustrating and anxiety-provoking for your workers when they feel like they may lose their status. Their focus shifts from, am I doing a good job? Am I working really hard? Does my employer love me? To, will I be able to stay in Canada? Will I be able to stay here legally? And that's not a mentality that is good for your employees. That's not a strong work mentality. Those workers will lose faith in your commitment to ensure that they are able to immigrate. So as I said, you should have a 3-year plan for every temporary foreign worker that you employ. Small businesses are often challenged with communicating what is happening behind the scenes. Make sure you communicate the effort you are making to keep your employees in Canada. Also, your TFWs should know what promotions or salary increases are available for them during the 3-year plan. For example, before they come in, if they're coming in as a food counter attendant or a heavy equipment operator, if the potential for them exists to be promoted, then focus on that. Let them know. Let them know that if they work really hard, at 12 months, at 16 months, the potential for them to move on to a supervisory skill level exists, because that will open up more options for their permanent residency potential. Advise your foreign workers on where they can get reliable, truthful information about their immigration status, and advise them not to trust their friends. Don't trust your family. Don't trust that guy you met on the street that said they'll do it for you for $200. Okay, I've got so many people that have ended up going home or ended up having permanent fatal issues on their applications because they trusted somebody they shouldn't.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, contrary to what most of us will believe, temporary foreign workers don't generally jump ship for $1 an hour. It's just the reality of the situation. If your workers know they're valued, if they know or not that they will be nominated for PR, if they know that there's that potential for a promotion in the future, basically, if you're able to spell out for them and map for them what the next 3 years are going to look like, it prepares them and it gets them excited about those next 3 years.
That's a fantastic point, Sean. So uncertainty is where you lose people. Uncertainty lets them begin doubting your commitment to their future. And really, if they know, if you stick to that plan, then they're going to be successful and they're going to be happy, and they won't have to worry about these things.
And this is probably the most important thing of all, and we're really going to drive this point home, but you have 4 years. That's it. You basically have 4 years as their employer to get all the communication, to get all the potential immigration lined up, all the PR status, money, and that's really it. These workers, if you're not are going to recognize that if you're not the one that's going to get them to their goal of PR, of making money, or whatever it happens to be, they're going to jump ship on you. But that's because it'll be your fault and not properly coaching and communicating with your staff.
And for those employers out there who say, oh, don't worry, my workers will figure out immigration on their own, you can bet that they've been approached by another employer who said they'll do it for them. Okay? I'm not saying you have to fill out all the documents on their behalf, but I am saying be involved, because if you're not, somebody else will be.
Most TFWs, this is important to bear in mind as well, they don't understand that the process to switch companies is not necessarily easy. Most TFWs don't understand that leaving a company, labels them as disloyal and potential flight risks to a future employer. And candidates need to be advised that their behavior can be counterproductive to their own future goals. Smart recruitment and professional pre-deployment coaching can instill a sense of loyalty and thus minimize the risks of flight. If you're not playing your part, and if you're not sticking to your plan, your employers or your candidates will not feel invested. And if they're not feeling invested, they will seek out someone who they do think is invested in them.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And make sure your workers know, we do with every single person we recruit, how hard it is and how long it takes to switch jobs to another employer, get a new LMO, get a new work permit. They don't make those decisions lightly. Okay, let's talk a little bit about why you should get to know your workers before they arrive. Now, let's start with the basics here. Many recruiters will sell simple foreign worker recruitment programs where you invest no time in the process, just tell them what you want, review the resumes, send them a check, and your workers will arrive on your doorstep. And I actually hear that from a lot of clients. They say, oh, this guy just told me it would be easy. Most of the businesses I talk to say, can you just do all of this for me? Let me be bold here and say there is no faster way to temporary foreign worker turnover than relinquishing all control of your program. Try to imagine this scenario for a second. You have never left your home country. You have several dependents, whether that be a spouse, a few kids. You may or may not be employed, working really hard every day of your whole life, and along comes a recruiter with a promise of a better life. They promise you a big payday, they promise you a big job, they promise you a really, really, really great opportunity, health care, a new country. Sounds a little too good to be true to me, but you have a friend who has a cousin who used this agency, so they're probably legitimate. You have an interview with this recruiter, he sits down, he tells you a little bit about the job, and they tell you that you are wonderful. Is that enough for you to leave your family and everything you've ever known? Is that enough for you to abandon everybody in your life, fly to the other side of the world, to what most people equate to Siberia? If this were you, I bet you would need to speak to your employers first. I bet you need to learn a little bit about the opportunity and check out if this job is actually legitimate. Maybe understand from somebody who lives there what the weather is like, what the corporate culture is like. Contrary to popular belief, the most common cause of TFW abandonment is not jumping ship for the extra cash. It's not the work environment. It's not even the job itself. What I'm saying is it is not you. The most common reason for temporary foreign worker turnover is homesickness. If your workers don't have a friend when they arrive, and this might even be temporary foreign worker abandonment before they even arrive in Canada. If they don't have a friend or another employee or a resource within management, they will have nobody to share this incredible adventure with, this experience with. We're going to discuss more on homesickness later, but I want you all to try to put yourself in their shoes and go through what they're going through. This brings me to my next point. Never recruit just one employee from any specific culture. This is the greatest adventure a candidate will ever experience. In many cases, the first time they ever step foot on an airplane. However, everything is different. The food is different. The weather is extreme. Social customs are completely bonkers to them. For most global citizens, as I mentioned previous, Canada is the Arctic Circle. Most workers have left spouses and children behind, and without a friend to share this with, without somebody to go out for a beer with, or go to church with, or go for a jog with, it can be terribly, terribly lonely.
So the best way to combat that loneliness is simply building up the trust. And in order to build that trust with your temporary foreign worker, it's essential to get to know your new employees before they have even stepped on a plane and arrived here in Canada. They need to know the job is real. They need to know you are genuinely interested in them as individuals, no matter who they are. A great opportunity is to get the ball rolling is to simply meet them on Skype. You're going to be doing interviews. Most interviews nowadays with temporary foreign workers are going to be done via Skype, so you're already going to have that accessible. So meet them on Skype. Create a dialogue. We look for examples when coaching our employers, and one of the great examples that we've come across is Lululemon. I'm sure we've all heard of them. If you look at Lululemon, when they are onboarding a new staff member, they post it all over Facebook. They post it all over everywhere that employee may even look. And they are incredibly, incredibly excited to show that new team member all about their business, all about their organization, all about the staff that they're going to be working with day in and day out. Team members are taking photos of themselves with cutouts and all sorts of poster boards, welcoming that future employee to the team. And really, it all boils down to sharing in their excitement.
And I could just share I have friends that work at Lululemon now, and the experience that they have on day one is that they already know their team, that they already love them, that they already feel welcomed, instead of that temporary foreign worker terror moment when everybody arrives and they're being judged. So you can change their entire experience by the first time that you meet them, because especially if you've already been introduced to them at that stage.
And if that trust is initiated before they arrive, you're going to have just a much more happier employee. Now, because of the processing time for a lot of our applicants can be quite considerable, this is something that it gives you a big window to really build that trust on. During that time, send them information about your company. Send them information about the community. Send them information about policies or procedure or whatever it happens to be. But developing a professional relationship, and most importantly, putting a face to the business and to the company, ultimately helps build confidence in the TFWs and excitement around the opportunity. We got to calm the nerves, and to do that, we communicate with them, and over time, we build that trust.
That's a great point. But on top of that, just as important as managing the expectations of your new workers, you have to make sure your team is ready. You have to make sure that everybody understands, and we're going to talk a little bit more about your team's expectations in a second, but you have to make sure that they know what they're getting themselves into, these workers, when you're bringing them in from overseas. And I have a funny story I'm going to share. It wasn't funny at the time, but a couple of years ago, I was flying out to visit a furniture manufacturing facility, beautiful furniture manufacturing facility with this giant, nice showroom in Alberta. And I had flown out. I was a little early for my meeting. I had known that they had brought in temporary foreign workers from Mexico previously. And my conversation with them was that the program was a failure. Their workers were not working very well. They started off really great, but their attitudes are just incredibly terrible, and that they're not the right fit for the organization. So I wanted to fly out and see, I didn't recruit these individuals. I wanted to make sure that this client was diamond material. So I flew out. I was a little early, and as I arrived, it was a nice summer day, and on the beautiful marble steps up to this really great showroom, these Mexican individuals were kind of sunning themselves and lying out and relaxing. I'm guessing they were on break. So I walked up to them and I said, "Hi guys, I have a friend that wants to work here. What do you think about this place? Are they a good employer?" And the response I got out of a scowled face was, "No, they're terrible." And I'm starting to get a little nervous here, but I go a little further and I say, "Well, why are they so terrible?" And he told me that they're all liars. They lied to us. So now I'm starting to get a little nervous because I had flown all the way over here for this meeting. I was very excited, but I'm not going to place my own workers into a shop that's filled with liars. I decided to dig one final step, and I said, "Tell me, how are they liars?" And the response I got was, "They promised us $13 an hour, and we're only getting $10.70. They lied to us about our contract. They're underpaying us." Nobody had ever taken the time to explain salary deductions to these employers, these new candidates. Nobody had ever taken the time to explain CPP, EI, healthcare premium deductions. You know, the problem here is not that the employer is terrible, it's that the recruiter failed a vital test. They missed the most important step, which is preparing your candidates for this experience. You have to manage the expectations of these workers. These guys told the total stranger that this place and this employer was terrible. All of those workers returned home, and that program was a failure. Later, my workers came in, and they're still there and very happy. But there's two very vital stages to managing expectations of your new international team members. The first is to outline clearly what your expectations are of these individuals. And you're gonna figure that out as a result of your 3-month plan. It's important to share specifics about job responsibilities, about housing, payroll, days off, employee benefits, et cetera, et cetera. If your employee knows all of this information well in advance, well before they ever travel and arrive in Canada, well before they even accept your offer, they will be more informed and less likely to leave due to simple misunderstanding. The second stage, or the second element, is delivering on the expectations that you've outlined. If you tell your team that the position will be for 40 hours a week with lots of opportunity for overtime, and your workers arrive to a 35-hour work week, they will feel cheated and betrayed. If you had told them well in advance that the opportunity was for 35 hours, and after they arrived, should they want, they would have the opportunity to work more additional hours and have overtime opportunities, all of a sudden you're the hero as the employer. Remember to under-promise and over-deliver. I highly encourage having a detailed document with specifics outlining every aspect of employment with your team and providing that to your new team members well in advance of their arrival. Make sure you provide an opportunity for questions. Many cultures would never question an authority figure. It's simply not done. Prepare a safe, non-judgmental environment for all questions to be answered. You will be surprised how difficult it is to encourage temporary foreign workers to be open and communicative with a supervisor. Do not give up. Get them on your side.
Now, just as important in terms of the temporary foreign workers, which we've obviously discussed quite extensively today, we have to be prepared for managing the team's expectations. And when I say team, more likely we're referring to the Canadian members of your workforce who will be soon to be working with temporary foreign workers. So for a lot of our employers, this is often the case, that this may be the first time they've ever had a group of international workers come and join their organization. And a lot of communities that we work in might not have a lot of different visible minorities or ethnicities and are fairly homogeneous. And so it's not all that uncommon for the Canadian workers to not have been exposed to international candidates or other international workers. So that is obviously an important part here. Now, the federal government recommends some anti-discrimination training. Now, we've had this, in our experience, has been a positive. You can never overemphasize that these workers are in fact going to be subject to the same laws as Canadian workers. So any form of anti-discrimination training has always been positive. We've also encouraged our employers to do it on an ongoing basis as well. If you were to do it once when the first workers arrive, that's great, but it needs to be an ongoing dialogue. It's also important to educate the employees on the federal laws banning workplace discrimination and really to explain to them the penalties that the company could face if they don't intervene in cases of discrimination. Some of the better exercises we've encouraged our clients to use are role-playing games to demonstrate what is in fact discrimination, Hold question and answer. That's a tremendous way of educating your workers as well as to constitute discrimination. And really, again, keeping that open dialogue going as to what constitutes discrimination and what doesn't. We really firmly believe that most discrimination is really based on ignorance. New employees are shunned or ignored because they might eat differently or have different customs or speak with a different accent, and often new immigrants can be labeled as outsiders. They are essentially here without their friends friends and family as been essential.
And it's a pretty quick way to feel isolated and pretty miserable if your workforce just tries to ignore them, which happens more often than you think.
Yeah. So how do we avoid this trap? Basically, as I've just said, getting them and communicating with them from the start is absolutely critical. Show your new recruits the warm welcome Canadians are known for. Show them that that we celebrate differences. Learn about their unique cultural differences and introduce your Canadian workers to them. Have a welcome celebration when the entire team has arrived and introduce them to your Canadian workers. Try cooking classes with new dishes from their home country. Pre-existing employees, and make sure that there's no surprises. One of the things that we've done in our office is, because we are a very multicultural office here at Diamond, is introducing about once a month a lunch special where everybody will bring in a lunch from their own cultural background, and we get to share and they get to explain. And we found for our own business that that's a tremendous way of helping break down cultural barriers.
You'd be amazed at how often the success of your programs lies in the hands of your existing employees and how open they are. Many of them might be terrified that these workers are going to come in and take their jobs. The stereotypes out there they exist. Let's get them involved in the process. Let's show them that they're not here to take over your position, but to help you with some of the shifts you might not want, and to help you so that you can all accomplish a common goal. Once you can get your existing team members on board, you'd be amazed at how successful the process can be. Okay, let's switch back to the candidate side now. Let's talk a little bit about Canadian culture shock. Now, you might think we're open, we're friendly, we're loving. I remember my first time going to Halifax. I was a little lost, and I was walking around the streets trying to find my destination. Somebody pulled over on the side of the road to ask me, "Where are you going? You need a hand?" I said, "Oh, I'm just going to so-and-so," and I gave an address, and they said, "Oh, sure, hop in. I'll give you a ride. We'll go there after dinner." Halifax is one of those places that's exceptionally friendly, even more so than most areas. Newfoundland's right up there, but I found the West to be just as hospitable, and the truth is the rest of the world sees that as creepy. I was in Poland recently, and I was smiling and walking around the streets, and people looked at me like I was a total freak. We're very positive people. We're very friendly people. We have to understand that. That, alongside the thousands of other little things that makes us Canada, makes us Canadians, that makes Canada so great, might also freak out a newcomer. So as an international traveler, I get excited about the idea of experiencing new cultures. I love trying new foods, learning new traditions, seeing different points of view. And most of the time I do my research online beforehand, or read Lonely Planet or Photos, and I try to prepare myself for what I'm going to see when I get to my destination. No matter what happens, I'm always surprised, though. I guess that's why we travel. There's nothing quite like being there. Now, I've had many seminars overseas. I always start them the same way when I'm interviewing a group of candidates in bulk. I have a big map of Canada, and I say, "What do you know about my country?" And there's usually some murmurs, but no matter what country I'm in, I always get the same three answers. It's big, it's cold, and it's rich. Those three things alone are enough to pique the curiosity of your new workers. And they all start with that. For many employers, that's all the information your workers will receive before they actually arrive in Canada. Now, many candidates actually believe they'll just figure it out when they get here. That's not a recipe for success. You have to prepare them. You have to get them ready. You have to plan for their post-arrival settlement.
Yeah, and that really boils down into, how do we, once they've arrived, how do we make sure that we retain these workers? Because obviously we've spent a considerable amount of time getting them here, we've interviewed them, we've learned to love them, we've engaged with them over however many months it's taken. How do we make sure that they don't leave us as soon as they've arrived? So, professional development is obviously a big part of any organization's ability to keep staff. And working with temporary foreign workers is really no different in that regard. So in terms of coaching, training, development, it's really not that different. All it relies on is a commitment as an employer to really follow through. So we've talked a little bit about the 36-month plan for you as an employer. This is essentially your 36-month plan for your candidates. Now I know we may be beating a dead horse here, but I cannot say it enough that you need to encourage your TFWs to share their career goals with you, to share their career aspirations. Just because they may be at the bottom of the totem pole doesn't mean they have wants and desires of their own. It doesn't mean that they have a dream. It doesn't mean that they're just here to sort of be a robot. They have goals too. And it's important and incumbent on you as their employer to create that two-way dialogue. Now, as I previously said, hopefully that is well established before they even arrive here in Canada. But once they have arrived, it doesn't necessarily mean you stop encouraging that. So communicate, communicate, and communicate. Now, Canadians, as Ben has said, are a cheery and cheerful bunch, and we obviously communicate more than just the words that we use. So it's important to remember that your body language, the way that you're using your words, the tone of your voice, the eye contact, the hand gestures, body positioning, even touching, with the proverbial pat on the back. Body language is a powerful tool and can be interpreted in many different ways. I have an interesting story from one of our first clients. It was an employer out in the East Coast, and this woman was quite honestly one of the most excited women I had ever had the pleasure of doing business with. She was an exceptional owner. She was engaged. She was running around. She was just an absolute pleasure to work with. We recruited her a number of workers, and she was so excited. And, I get excited when my employers are excited. Now, these candidates arrive, and they are great workers, and they are working hard, but the employer says, something's not right here, and I can't quite put my finger on it. And they're working great, but it just seems like they have an attitude problem. And I can't really, she's saying to me, I can't really figure out what I'm doing because I'm trying to really, keep them excited and everything. Well, after some discussion, after some long conversations, we eventually figured out that these workers were all practicing Muslims. And this employer was very big on giving high fives. And that was really one of the big ways that she showed how excited she was. And so when she would run by them and try to give them a high five, they would sort of very meekly sort of look down and look away and get embarrassed and really just try to ignore her. And she was interpreting this in one way, and the candidates were interpreting this in another way. Now, eventually, through our conversation, we learned this, and I said to her, you have to be aware that they are not going to be able to touch you because of their faith. And as a result of that conversation, she was able to really change her communication style, and eventually, she did get the level of enthusiasm out of them, but now it was more vocal rather than in body language. So to me, it was a great example of how we communicate in Canada versus how other cultures interpret our communication. Now, it's also really important to be sensitive to TFW's cultural customs and to research how they're different from here in Canada. That's basically really what it boils down to. Now, like Canadian workers, TFWs require an investment on your behalf, as we've said, And we found that this is really best accomplished by implementing a system of metrics supported by career coaching. One of my first jobs in operations was with a company that was a fast-growing business. They had a lot of great staff, and everybody was really excited, but for some reason there was a very high level of turnover. Now, this really surprised me because everybody was happy. Everybody was, and from management side, everything was going great, and they were quick to say, oh, how great it is and how much their staff enjoyed working there, but it didn't explain why the staff was leaving. Now, upon investigating what was going on here, I quickly surmised that there wasn't any clear metrics in place. There wasn't anything clear to actually point to the employees and say, this is what you're doing well, this is what you need work on. This is what, I think you've done exceptional at, this is what, could use improvement. So after implementing the metrics, and with a little bit of coaching, we were able to turn what was a very high level of employees leaving into 0 employees leaving, because we were finally able to point to the numbers and support the numbers by coaching. So leveraging those performance reviews to gain insight into employees' goals and aspirations, can create career opportunities, and it can create loyalty because the employers will know and the TFWs will know exactly where they stand with each other.
And I'll also jump in and say a great tip for this stage is to actually have a TFW liaison as a Canadian. To have one person there that your workers can always report to and they can always talk to, whether it be for career advice or whatever it might be. Just have one person on your team that's always accessible for these candidates. And for some of our large clients, they have entire teams of TFW liaisons. Also, a buddy system works really well upon arrival. Okay, let's talk a little bit about rewarding performance. Now, everybody wants to feel valued within your team, and TFWs are no different in that regard. It's essential to reward performance and highlight every positive accomplishment with something tangible. Salary bonuses are great, but all of that money is going home. Every single dollar they earn, they can't justify going out and spending $100 on a pair of shoes when they can get a $20 pair of shoes and send $80 back home because it's going to go a lot further there. I highly encourage rewarding your TFWs in other ways that are going to help build loyalty to your business. What about going out for dinner or recognizing start date anniversaries with a party or there's a great opportunity to actually go out and provide experiences that your workers would never ever think about and they'll never forget. Get them ski lessons. Or give them something that they can do that they can't just sell and send that money home. It might also be a great idea to get candidates something physical that they can share in their living quarters because they share those quarters with other employees, and that might provide motivation of those other employees to pick up the pace. If you've got one person that's a real rock star, get them something great for their home. Unfortunately, sometimes Canadian employers forget that even though a position may be trivial, it's essential to take a genuine interest in employees as individuals and as people. It creates long-term success and growth here. Now, back on communication, I'll only speak quickly because I know we've talked about it a lot, but when bringing in a large group of temporary foreign workers, be aware that communication with one means communication with everyone. The temporary foreign worker net is exceptionally strong when it comes for information. And if you give one person a raise, everybody will know about that raise. Integrating different cultures into your workforce isn't unique to Canada. However, there is always a birds of a feather flock together mentality there. So if you've got temporary foreign workers that are managing themselves and you've got a large group of one specific culture, you're going to find that they might become very cliquey. Just remember, they're going to share everything about raises, residency, everything you can imagine. Let's talk about why candidates are being poached from your workforce. It's critical to remember that your temporary foreign workers are in Canada in the first place. They're there for you. As previously mentioned, your workers, some workers are not necessarily going to be motivated by permanent residency. Many are. That's the primary goal. But some are there just work hard, keep their head down, and simply make as much money as they can during their short time, their 4 years in Canada. Your communication strategy needs to be strong to combat the constant barrage of misinformation out there. They're going to get people lying to them. They're going to get people offering them better jobs. They're going to get people, consistently poaching them and trying to. I have a quick service franchise that tells me they lose their TFWs through the drive-through because they're so close to the oil fields. Your greatest challenge as a temporary foreign worker manager will be in creating an educated TFW workforce that doesn't need to consult family and friends because you provided all of this information for them. Make sure they don't have to look elsewhere and get into the he said, she said mentality.
Yeah, and that's a really, really interesting point as well. Now, I know we've talked a lot about, motivating and encouraging, and this is really important, but I know we have to address the idea of homesickness. Now, I know we've all had that feeling, whether we were, 6 years old in that summer camp or maybe something more recently happening. Your TFWs will experience homesickness. We all want our mothers home cooking every now and again, and these workers are no different. So I think we can all appreciate it, and I think we can all sympathize with it. Now, how do we combat it? How do we try to eliminate it? It is imperative that in the course of your constant communication and in the course of your open dialogue with your TFWs, you remind them, why they're here. And continue to reinforce the positives about working in Canada and what it is ultimately doing for their lives. I mean, we have an expression here at Diamond where we say, we change lives. And I think that is very, very true because, we get to see it on the faces of our workers every day.
Sometimes they forget it.
Yeah.
Sometimes after being here in this weather and with some of our people, especially in Alberta or in Newfoundland, where that weather becomes a serious issue, they forget and they hibernate and they stay inside and they're consistently talking to their family about how terrible it is. All they have left is work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of the ways that we've helped our clients in combating that is we've encouraged them to do some research into, into their TFWs and what is available to them in the larger community. So whether that is, the diocese of the local church or mosque or the YMCA. The government does a lot of great work in terms of providing assistance in programs. So as an employer, it's very beneficial to you to educate yourself on some of the free programs that the federal government will provide in terms of getting your temporary foreign workers comfortable.
And most cultures, especially those with a large presence here, have community centers specifically set up for this. The Filipino community is world-renowned and it's everywhere. The Irish government has actually hired a full-time individual to help settle workers for Irish individuals. So there's lots of opportunity and resources out there. Just make sure they don't hibernate.
And if your workers are ultimately bringing their families over here, it also provides a way for you to assist in their transition because it will soften the blow. These programs are very great at helping not only an individual but in helping a family. And the easier that transition is for the family, the easier it's going to be for the worker, and ultimately the easier it's going to be for you as their employer.
So the final stage in that area there is I always coach my candidates by saying, yes, it's going to be really hard for you, but it's up to you to make it easier on your spouse or on your children. Go out and make the best friends that you're going to have or that your children are going to grow up with. Go find them now so that they don't have to when they arrive. Also using social media to help publicize success stories, get them on your company page. If somebody's done something really great, put it on their Facebook page so that their family back home knows what they're doing and that their community here knows that they're valued. They're not going to be so willing to jump ship. Let's talk about temporary foreign worker exit orientations. And this is probably my most valuable tip for today's seminar and the most mandatory portion of the Diamond experience. Now, this is it's essential to provide a culturally customized, detailed exit orientation for all of your workers. This should take place between the interview stage and the departure stage at some point when they're still in their home country. Now, Diamond's presentation, we usually have several, but the average one is about 3 hours long. We cover everything from Canadian money, where we actually show them our bills and our coins, to tax deductions, showing them copies of pay stubs and exactly what that's going to look like, to restaurants, religious workshops, and religious worship in different places that they can actually go to work with the deity of their choosing, transportation options. You know, don't stand in the middle of the Trans-Canada and try to hail down a bus like you would in the Philippines. You'd be amazed at how much information is covered in this section. I mean, we take so much for granted living in Canada, but when somebody's coming from the third world into Canada, or even from Ireland, or from the States, you know, there is still a significant difference, like taxes and things along those lines, that they need to know before they arrive. The reasons employers give me for candidates turning over before recruiting through Diamonds are a little silly at times. You know, I've heard things like, oh, my candidate said the weather was too cold, or they couldn't make any new friends, or the food was weird, or my employers were using me, or the bus was more expensive than I thought it would be, or my absolute favorite, my house that the employer found for me was too dirty and the women never came to clean it up. Yes, we brought in a group of Moroccan individuals, and it was culturally, it was just the norm that the women would come and clean their place when they rented a house or an apartment in their home country. So one of the things we had to do was, as part of our exit orientation, we have to reinforce that everybody is equal in Canada, and that you're responsible to clean up your own space and do your own laundry. That was an interesting one. Now, I think I'm going to run about 10 minutes overtime to do Q&A. If you have to leave because you have another commitment, we'll follow up to answer your questions, and this will be on the recording that we send out to everybody on YouTube. I'll also reach out to everybody individually and make sure I've answered everything they'd like. But if you can stay on, you know, I've only got a couple minutes left. Now, finally, the last stage, mitigating turnover before your workers arrive. This is an opportunity to share important information about your company that you would like your new employees to know before they arrive in Canada. I mentioned the new situation with Australia. Our visa times in countries like the Philippines and India and different areas are longer than anybody could ever imagine, some of the longest in the world. You know, right now going to the Philippines, you might be 16 months start to finish with that process. During that time, they can be poached for other employers. So it's our job to keep them excited. It's our job, I mean, they might find other jobs. They might find other opportunities. Why make them wait to learn everything about your team until after deployment? They have enough to be excited about when they get here. In the weeks before they fly, candidates can be studying employee manuals, they can learn local labor laws, they can get familiar with company policy. You know, if your team has any online training available, let those candidates go through it now while they're waiting. Any opportunity to keep these people excited during the waiting period is important. What you do not want to happen is people leaving, signing on for other companies because the process is taking too long. It's really fast to move within Asia. It's even faster to move within Europe. Oftentimes, the initial excitement of working abroad and working in Canada can wear off after a few months. Those of you who have worked with AIT know that those processing times are exceptionally long. You know, visa processings are at an all-time high. Skilled individuals may find other work during those wait times. If you're finding the right people, they're going to be in high demand. They don't want to wait. They may leverage your offer to find work elsewhere. Stay in touch with your workers. Keep them excited. In many cases, we have daily communication with our candidates to keep them interested. In many of our source countries, you know, especially Ireland, we have lectures on life in Canada. We host wine and cheese events for different families of people that might be coming to similar cities or similar provinces, so they can share this adventure with somebody and they can have a friend when they arrive. It is not a simple matter of, oh, I'm hiring a recruiter, they'll do the LMO for me, they'll send some resumes, and my workers will arrive. That day is finished. If you want to be successful with your temporary foreign worker program, be involved, create your 36-month plan, share your 36-month plan, and follow it to the T. Do not deviate. Okay, that was my passionate moment. I hope I've given you and your business some suggestions and insights today that's actually going to help with temporary foreign worker retention. Overall, my advice is to communicate actively, communicate often with your staff, both your local and your international staff throughout this experience, both before and during and after their time with your team. Let's take questions at this stage. I've got a couple that have come through, many of which are on the same topic. The first question that I'm consistently getting is, if you change the terms of the employer's agreement, if the candidate changes jobs in any capacity, do I need an LMO, and will that affect their ability to continue working during that time? This is a great question and one that I get often. Now, the long and short of it, let's start with the way the law is written. The law is written that if you change any element of their employment while working with you, whether that be a huge raise, whether that be giving them different responsibilities, whether that be turning them into a supervisor, they cannot work in that role without possessing a valid work permit for that role and that wage. And the reason behind that, or the reason Service Canada will give you, is, well, you proved that there was a labor shortage at $11 an hour, but you never proved that there was a labor shortage at $12 an hour. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting, because the program's a little schizophrenic. The Temporary Foreign Worker Program requires that you actually give a wage review on your candidates at the end of every 12 months. So they want you to give them a wage review and potentially an increase, but you have to have a new LMO. What we found is during the audit stage, we have employers that have dealt with these situations similarly, and without knowing more about it, I can't give you official guidance or advice, but what I can share is that they've been told by their auditor that it's okay if they give them a small raise, but anything in excess or anything outrageous, and they have to get a new LMO. They have not put specific boundaries on what that means. I can't give you specifics or whether or not you will get in trouble for doing that, to what extent. What I will share is that if your workers change jobs, if they have additional responsibilities, if they're promoted to a supervisor, something along those lines, you must give them a new LMO with a new work permit before they take on those responsibilities. And as long as their new work permit has been submitted before their previous one expires, your employee can remain and work in what's called implied status until they get a response on their work permit. So just because they submitted their new work permit or their new visa and their old one expired and you haven't gotten the results of the LMO or the visa back yet, it doesn't mean they're finished and they have to go home. They can remain working in implied status until they get the response on behalf of their new work permit or their new visa. I've got another question here. What do I do if my worker quits on me? Now, this is can be a long question, and I can fill you in on more of this later if you're curious. But there are different ways. If that worker quits and moves to a new employer, and they get a new LMO with that employer, then your responsibility to give them their flight home is concluded. You're finished. That worker can stay in Canada until their work permit or their visa expires. If they quit or they're terminated and they don't have a new employer but they want to stay in Canada, they are legally allowed to stay until their work permit or their visa expires. And they can try to find work within that time. If they quit and you anticipate that they are going illegal and you make a flight opportunity for them to go home and they stay beyond their status and they flee, there are numbers and there are places that you can contact to report them. Okay, once you report them, your responsibilities are finished. Yes, it is the case that years later, if that person services and comes to you and says, I want my flight home, and you say, well, I made it available for you, they do have grounds to say, no, you have to give it to me now. But you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to be responsible for them if they're working illegally. That's from an immigration perspective. From a court of public opinion, when on the front page of the newspaper, something along those lines, that's a different story. But if you find yourself in a similar situation, please call me My email address is b.guth@diamondglobal.ca. My phone number is 416-730-0029, extension 240. I am consistently available. I can always answer questions, and we're going to be doing another webinar shortly. I would love your thoughts on topics, something that you'd be interested in learning about, something that we can walk you through. I'm happy to do an intro to LMOs or something along those lines if you feel that would be helpful as well. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks everybody for listening and participating, and hopefully you got a lot of value out of it.
And please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I will be in Newfoundland. Sean and I actually will both be in Newfoundland, St. John's, and some other areas from Tuesday to Thursday of next week. Would love to sit down and have a coffee with you. If you have any questions whatsoever, please just shoot me an email, and we're here to help at any stage. Thank you so much again for listening. We'll send out a copy of this via YouTube in a couple of days. There's also going to be a white paper available from our previous webinar on the changes to the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, and there will be a white paper on this topic in a couple of weeks. I hope you have a great day. Enjoy the rest of it wherever you are. I hope you stay warm, and we will see you shortly. Have a wonderful day.